Very good evening and welcome to another session of the Right Circle Faridabad and Made It with Seema Anandji. As you all are aware, the Prabhakatan Foundation has ensured that patrons catch up with their favorite sessions and keep their spirits high during these trying times. The foundation has successfully organized more than 350 sessions during lockdown. The foundation endeavors to preserve and showcase our rich culture legacy through various initiatives to further its causes. Today, we are happy to welcome our guest author, Ms. Seema Anand. Seema Anandji is a London based mythologist and narrative practitioner. She is an acknowledged authority on the Kama Sutra and lectures on Eastern erotomology, Tantric philosophy, the Mahavidyas, Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, among other subjects. Her work on the revival and reproduction of oral literature from India is associated with UNESCO Project for Endangered Oral Traditions. In conversation with her is Shruti Mittal, SAS Women of Bengaluru. I would request all of you now to sit back, relax, and enjoy this wonderful session. And one more, message I would like to give you all for those who are interested in her books, may kindly message me or Anshuji with their addresses. Thank you so much. Over to you, Shruti.
Thank you so much, Shweta, for introducing Seemaji. It indeed is a pleasure that we have her in our midst. Seemaji, it's an absolute pleasure, and the little that I've got to know you, I'm sure our viewers are in for a treat getting to know you better.
You're so kind. Thank you, Shruti. I'm looking forward to the conversation as well. As I was saying, I love the SRS women and I love the sessions we do with the Prabha Khaitan Foundation. They're always so much fun. There's so much energy to it.
Thank you. That's so kind of you. To get started now, Seemaji. So, when I was reading up your bio, I saw that there's so many diverse things you do. It's described as a mythologist, a storyteller, an author, and holistic lifestyle coach. There's so much to you. Let's start and break them down a little. Tell us a little about the mythologist in you. Is it just the Kama Sutra that you researched into? I read somewhere that it's also the Bhagavad Gita. So, tell us about that journey of yours.
So actually, it started with mythology. So I've always been a mythologist. That's been my literary background. As you know, okay, so I am now 58. When I was growing up in India, very post-colonial kind of education. We only ever studied the Western authors, So I can
Right.
quote Shakespeare backwards to you. I can quote Milton, Chaucer, anybody, but I never studied anything Indian. Never studied an Indian author. Didn't know anything about our Indian mythology or our background. Got married, moved to the UK, discovered the Indian mythologies much later in life and got totally kind of drowned into that because there's something so fascinating about Indian mythology. I don't know if it's because it's what speaks to you from the inside. You know how it is, like some things you
Yeah,
just belong to certain things, or
absolutely.
I don't know what it is, but it just totally sort of sucked me in. But no, I didn't start with the Kamshastras. I knew nothing about the Kam Sutra and all the other erotic texts, nothing. I started with my interest is in women's stories.
Mhm.
So, how women are depicted in different stories and how the stories that we tell define who we are. Because, like I said, we tell so many stories about how the man comes home and he beats up his wife, but she's so good. She never says anything to him. वो इज्जत रखती है, घर की इज्जत रखती है. She's so good. And you automatically define a good woman to be somebody who never speaks up. And the woman who speaks up and fights back is not a good woman. So I was very interested in how the stories that we tell define our identity. And gradually I started to realize that and the stories, if we're ever going to create change, it's these stories that will have to be changed. And I realized that we never ever tell stories where a woman has the right to her own body. Her sexuality is never hers. It's always somebody's property. So I kind of went looking for the Kamshastras just to see what are the stories that we had silenced. And I found those stories. And since that day, Since the day I started, I have not looked back because, Shruti, I cannot tell you how beautiful our Kam Shastras are. And I'm so sad that these have been silenced because there's nothing in the world literature that you can find to compare with this.
Absolutely. That's so brilliant. And, just talking to you, I think evokes that feeling of want to read the book right now. The second question
You
that I'm
should.
going
I'm
to
going
ask
to
is
tell you about a couple of books today.
absolutely, absolutely. Coming to my next question, in the era that you come for, like, I think you have already answered part of my question, was such a closed era and colonial era, and women were very hesitant to speak about, and they were brought up in that way. What is it you would say that shaped your life? Any early influences for you to be open up enough to discuss these things and take all the hate mail and messages that I'm sure you must be receiving?
Yeah, unfortunately, the trolls, they're ever present. So, yeah, interestingly, I have a slightly different background in the sense that my great grandmother, so my nanny's mother, was an educated woman and she was a working woman. So, she actually had a very fancy job. She was an inspector of schools. And
Wow.
she was very, very big on education. So she had four daughters. My nanny had three other sisters, and she educated all of them to be professionals. So my nanny and her youngest sister were medics, and the older two went into academics and they became principals of, the government colleges around Punjab. So two of them were principals of colleges, and my nanny was in psychology. And her younger sister was a mad woman. She was my role model growing up. She
Wow.
was a gynecologist, and she made her millions performing illegal abortions because in those days, even that was not okay to do. And she was just an amazing woman. And then from there, because they were all working women, educated women, again, my mother and her siblings were the same. So much so, Shruti, that when my mother was pregnant with me, she divorced my father at that point when she was still pregnant with me because he raised his hand on her, and my grandparents said, "How dare he raise his hand on you? You come back right away." So they supported her, and it was so unusual, in times like that. And then my mother met my first stepfather, and they actually lived together. So I was one when they met. You can imagine, 58 years ago in Delhi, they lived together. But so did all her friends, so their whole crowd of friends were very trendy. A lot of these ladies had their boyfriends, whatever you want to call them, their relationships, but they were also amazing Masis to me.
Hmm.
Like, mommy was working. So I was at boarding school from the time I was 5 years old. I was at Wellams, and I'd come home for chuttis, and she would go to work and she would leave me with one of these people, one of these masis of mine who would look after me during the day if they were not working, or if she was working and I had to go and see my nana nani who were in Amritsar, one of them would take the day off, take me by train to Amritsar from Delhi. So it's a group of women that I grew up around who were all really, really strong. They were working, they were doing what they wanted, and they were really loving. And you realize that there is so much more to a woman's identity than just that little box that you get put into. It's only when I stepped out into the world I realized that women have boxes that, while I lived at home, I didn't know there was a box. So I guess I was lucky enough to have a background which said, go be, you have to be. Because also we don't have a choice. The women in our family don't have a choice. We don't have the choice to sit home and not do something. So you have to do something. My great grandmother was also a social activist, and she died leading a demonstration against domestic violence. So I feel that all this is something that, so this is something that I didn't have to battle down. I've had other battles to fight in doing this work, but the background battle was not there. So that was a good thing. But don't worry, the world taught me enough about all the taboos for women. And I got enough abuse, enough trolling to, and people always say to me that what I get is not as bad as what other people face. And maybe that's true. But I'll tell you what I get is bad enough for me. It just shakes me up completely.
Like they say, it takes a whole tribe to raise a child, and luckily for you, you had an absolute empowered tribe of women at having your back. That's probably why. That's one of the first questions that came to my mind actually when I was thinking about you. That it really must have taken some phenomenal women in your early years for you to be where you are. Brilliant.
Touch wood. Touch
Nice.
wood.
So now tell us, you said you got into mythology and reading these books once you moved to the UK. That brings me to my next question. Life in UK versus life in India. Do you think it's at that point when you moved there, it was a more liberal world there? Did that allow you to grow as a person more?
So when I first moved here, I think I didn't, like I said, I didn't really think about it because, to be perfectly honest, Shruti, from the way that I see India going now, I think that when I was growing up, it was possibly a more liberal world even in India. I think
Wow.
Delhi was definitely, I mean, I used to go to college wearing short skirts. I have a feeling that the next generation in Delhi is not going to be able to wear short
Yeah.
skirts,
True.
in public. So I don't know how much, I mean, truly, I don't know where it's going. But yeah, what did happen was I came over here and I think my husband got a bit of a shock. He wasn't expecting quite so much independence from me, and what I thought was okay for a woman to do, and he didn't think it was. And so it was a little bit of, well, a lot bit of settling down and having to overcome issues. But I guess at some point, if you decide that that's what you're going to do, and somewhere you find some support, you do go ahead and do it. But yeah, so the first few years were literally, I still continued to follow my own passion in mythology and stories, which were mostly European mythologies. That's what I'd studied all along. So that's what I was still doing. And I started a fellowship and I started to travel around Europe as a tour guide, taking groups, primarily groups who came from India, to show them the history of Europe. And my work was on how you tell stories in English. So, I mean, that's not, for the Indians, that's not our first language. For the Europeans, that's not their first language. But that story is being told in English. So, how does it change? What happens to the story? How do the words change the story? So, it was still that I was focusing on. And then gradually, I got introduced to, I think after the kids were born, you get introduced to some of the Indian mythologies. And suddenly I decided I wanted to know more.
Wow. So this is all
But yeah,
becoming
I
such a
think also the fact that I have done at least the initial years of my work in this country rather than in India, perhaps that did help in some ways, because I think that over there with the extended in-laws, the extended family, I know that maybe I would have got a lot more obstacles.
So this already sounds like a perfect amalgamation of, a lot of your introductions, a mythologist, a storyteller. It's all coming out so beautifully. So interesting to know that there's so many layers to your personality, Seema ji. We are enjoying this a
Thank
lot.
you.
And another
Actually,
very
you'll find,
interesting
Shruti,
thing.
that when we discuss the literature, you'll find that everything is connected. In ancient Indian literature, karma or love was not a separate thing. It was so much a part of your life that literature, art, music, everything is interconnected.
Great. So I must tell our viewers, when I was talking to Seema ji earlier, she came up with something very interesting. She said we're having like a little international samosa because the Prabha Khaitan Foundation is based in Calcutta. I am in London. We have the Meerut chapter and you're from Bangalore. So that was such a nice way of putting it across that we're enjoying this little international samosa this evening. Okay, now Seema ji, tell us. I also have heard from you that a lot of the things in Kama Sutra relate to the seasons and the festival. There is a lot of aspects of that. So, coming to the current month we are in, is there any significance of that, and can that be connected to our ancient
I
scripts?
have to tell you, Shruti, so you guys and the Merit chapter are the first people to get an insight into this particular research, which started a while ago. It hasn't been made
Wow.
public yet. But yes, it's very exciting because we are in the month of Chaitra. And in
Right.
ancient times, Chaitra, Chaitra is the month of spring. It's the month of all the spring festivals. It's all about raising the energy of the earth, after winter when everything has gone to sleep. It's about reawakening the earth to its own pleasure, getting Mother Earth to blossom again, to bring up its flowers again. So it's just a really, really beautiful month. It's a joyous month. But what's even more exciting is that I discovered that in Chaitra, in ancient India, there were 30 festivals to Kamdev that was celebrated. So if you consider we have this one Valentine's Day in the West, which everybody gets so excited about,
Yeah.
we had 30 love festivals. And
Wow.
I think that the reason we lost these love festivals is because they weren't celebrated as big havans and big pujas, and it wasn't done by the Brahmins where lots of money would be given to them. They were performed by women, and they were done as games. Most of the rituals were games and picnics and outings and laughter. So I think that when the texts were being translated, it didn't really benefit the Brahmin community to translate it because,
Yeah.
I mean, unko kya milega isme se? You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to be doing the pujas, they're not
Yeah.
going to
You
be
don't need
given
a
money.
pundit
So,
to do these things.
exactly. So,
Yeah.
why bother with it? And the festivals are so gorgeous. I mean, right from, and this is something, and I'm going to tell you about the most recent one I discovered because I think it's the most beautiful, but I'm going to start with this one because it's something I want all of the ladies to go out and do tomorrow itself, or even tonight if you want. So there was a bunch of different ideas that different trees would only flower if they had attention from women. So the Ashoka tree, the trees with the white flowers, basically, will only come to blossom if a woman has a mouthful of wine that she spits on the tree. So before drinking your glass of wine, if you put one mouthful of wine on the tree, it will come to blossom. There's another one that will only flower, I think the mango tree. If you, as a woman, paint the underneath of your feet with alta, which was one of the Sola Shringhar, and then you strike the tree and it says, oh, okay, I've been awoken up as well. Because in a little while, I want to tell you about the connotation of the alta under the feet, because that's a very, very special metaphor in our literature. In another one, it said that you have to go on picnics. And then for certain trees, the women had to laugh a lot around them. So there would be lots of games where the women would laugh, and hearing their laughter, the trees would blossom. But these were all different festivals. But I just discovered one from the Nilamata Puran. So the Nilamata Puran talks about a festival which was mostly celebrated only in Kashmir. I don't know why. Maybe it was celebrated elsewhere, but it talks about the Kashmiri folklore talks about this, where the man would bathe his wife with scented water as a thing of, as his worship to Kamdev, as his worship to his love for her. And I loved this because in all of the other rituals and all the other ceremonies, it's always the man has to be bathed. It's always something being poured on him and he's being all, purified and celebrated. So in this one, the idea is that the man would take, they say it's narcissus, the flower that they use. So the men would take narcissus flowers to Kamdev. They would worship Kamdev with it. Then it would be made into garlands, which they would wear around their neck. And then they would create this water, which was scented with certain things. And then they would actually bathe the wife with this scented water. Now, don't you think it's beautiful?
Lovely. How pretty. Yeah, we are all going to head and get our men to bathe us in scented water, probably
Yes.
tonight, or get our guests. And you were also talking about something about the alta, Seemaji.
Okay, yeah. So, I always say to people when they say about what's the best translation, it's not about translations, unfortunately, because there are good scholars in both English and Sanskrit who can translate it word for word, but the Kama Sutra is a treatise, it's a shastra. So it's written in metaphor. So basically, you've heard the term Charan Kamal.
Right, yes.
Yeah, okay. So, like for instance, when you read Kalidas, it'll say constantly, let's see how he takes her feet to his head. So, in
Yeah.
this, what the idea is that basically you only take somebody's feet to their head if you're lovers. Now, the idea was that the most popular position was where the woman would be underneath, the man would be on top, And the woman would have her feet on the man's shoulders. So over here, her ankles on the man's shoulders. So the alta from under the feet would rub off on his forehead. And no matter how hard you tried, you couldn't get rid of that color. So if you saw a man with a bit of alta, you knew what he had been doing. And you get this in a lot, whether it's the Rastarangini, whether it's Kalidas. You have this thing about the man coming home with a bit of alta and the wife feeling upset because she knows he's been with another woman or whatever. It gets used constantly in our mythology. So the idea was that when you aroused your own pleasure, you painted the underneath of your foot with alta, and then you struck the tree. It was like, okay, my pleasure has been aroused. Now you should arouse yours as well.
Wow, that's absolutely such beautiful symbolism and such beautiful gems that we have in our Shastra.
They
Now, coming
really
to my
are,
next question.
Sorry, I was going to say that in the Kumar Sambhavam, Kalida, this is where the wedding of Lord Shiva and the goddess Parvati takes place. And as the
Right.
maids dress her, they put all her, they put her oils, they put all her perfume on her. And then at the end, they paint her feet with alta. And then they all giggle and they say, now let's see how he takes these feet to his Chandrama. And before I understood what this meant, I used to always think, why is he going to put her feet on his head? Now I know.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Yeah. So tell me, having studied this Shastras and because you know so much about other mythologies also, my next question to you is, are there other books, such ancient books on lovemaking and the art of lovemaking in any culture apart from the Indian culture?
There are a lot of books on lovemaking and the art of lovemaking in all the ancient cultures, but all of them are very, very based on the male gaze. So they're all, this is the reason I love the Indian Kam Shastras are because they talk about the female pleasure. None of the others display it to that extent. So the ancient Persian ones are quite misogynist. I mean, they're quite aggressive. So are the Japanese. So the Chinese ones go deepest into the idea of a woman's pleasure, but still very much from a man's needs. Now, when I say that, I'll explain what I mean. So, like for instance, one of their most erotic texts is a book called Jinping Mei, the Chinese text. And it's about this man who basically goes out and has sex with lots and lots of women. Some of it is consensual, some is not consensual, but it's basically really violent. They talk about how he's burning them with his cigarettes, he's dragging them across the floor by the hair. And even where it's consensual, he's doing all this and they're saying, yeah, the women are loving it. Now we know as women that is not true. We are not loving it. And it always finishes with, I mean, they talk a lot about how many thrusts are important. And it's weird, it's like, so the Chinese ancient erotica says that if you are truly a good lover, a man must be able to do at least 4,000 to 5,000 thrusts before he comes. Now, I'm sorry, but as a woman, I'll tell you something. If my husband was going to do 5,000 thrusts, I'd be fed up, bored, out of my mind with like, stop now. This is not about my pleasure. The Indian texts do not talk about thrusts at all. The Kama Sutra doesn't even mention the word thrust. It doesn't mention sexual fluids. The Chinese erotica will even tell you how much sexual fluid is being produced with how much excitement and what it should sound like. Yeah, so it's very based on the man's pleasure. The Kama Sutra, contrary to what most people think, doesn't even talk about the act of sex. It talks about pleasure. It talks about foreplay. It talks about spending hours on kissing the woman to bring her to her arousal. It doesn't even it talks about positions, but barely just about positions. And that too for a reason. It's not to end in sex, but it's written with so much more beauty that I can't even begin to there is no such coarseness in our ancient texts, none. It is so beautiful that, I mean, I just think we've lost it. And that's what makes it so sad for me that, these are texts of such beauty that we need to bring them back.
Absolutely. And listening to this, it's obvious that women were held in a very high position in ancient times in India. You know, this especially has been such a revelation that none of the other texts even speak about a women's pleasure, and there's so much of it here. And it's so beautifully done. You're just getting us so much more interested in this subject that
I
obviously you're
certainly
really
hope
passionate
so.
about.
I
Brilliant.
am, because like I said, there's that book, very famous book called The Thousand and One Arabian Nights.
Yeah.
Now, again, if you ever read the original version, which you can get, it's not that difficult to get. It's a very, very, it's an erotic book. And the original version is actually, and it's very aggressive. I mean, it's really quite horrible. I hate reading it because to me, it's quite aggressively violent. I don't like it. Or if you read what they call The Perfumed Garden, it's very based on coarse graphic language, or at least that's how they portray it now in their translations. In the Indian text, they don't even talk about a position by the name of the position when you tell the stories.
Mm-hmm.
They mention it through a piece of jewelry.
Oh,
So that's how actually, okay, ladies, I hope you're
beautiful.
listening in very carefully because I want to tell you this. This is how women were actually taught how to make love. So each position was taught to them through the
Wow.
movement of a piece of jewelry. So, for
That's
instance, when a woman had to be on top during lovemaking, which, by the way, was a position of power. So, in all the other ancient mythology, a woman was never allowed to be on top during lovemaking. The Kama Sutra, of course, says it has different positions where you can be on top. But the idea was that for you to have ultimate pleasure, the right, and to make sure that your back doesn't get hurt while you're on top, the idea is that you only move your hips. You don't move the rest of your body. So the women would wear these girdles with lots and lots of ghungroos around their waist and make sure that the ghungroos didn't make a sound.
Wow.
Okay. So that's how you learned to do that particular position by putting on a jingling girdle. So
Brilliant.
and that's what they say. So when you have different plays again or different stories, they'll never say then she climbed up on top and they'll just say she put on her jingling girdle, and you know what is going to happen.
That's absolutely brilliant. But you know, another thing conversely is when you're saying that our Kama Sutra has so much finesse to it, our next generation have so much of the other part of it which you're describing. There's so much aggression in their in the terms they use for maybe sexual behavior and the kind of words they say. So, how do you see? Is this a Western influence, you'd say, and how do we pass this message on to our next generation that there is so much finesse, there is so much beauty, there's so much delicacy in this act? I really feel that the next generation is losing that.
They are, Shruti, but then it's not really their fault. They haven't been introduced to it. I mean, like I said, I grew up, I studied literature at LSR. I was never taught a single Indian text. And even now, when people are taught the text, let's say if you read Kalidas, if you read Meghdootam or you read Kumar Sambhavam, nobody's going to explain the metaphors to you. That knowledge is gone. So, agar koi सुनेगा ही नहीं पूरी उम्र, I mean, if kids grow up never hearing about it, उनको कहाँ से समझ आएगी कि ये है भी कि नहीं? And the words that we use, unfortunately, are the words that we know of. I've always said that. So actually, I have to change something that I've always said. Now, I've always said that in the Kama Sutra, they're very, very particular that they never use any bad language. Okay. So, and I've always said that they use such beautiful language to describe the parts of the body. Like, the vagina, the vulva becomes the Chandan Mahal. Or sometimes it's known as the Madan Dolna, the swing of the love god. The clitoris is the Madan Chhatri, the umbrella of the love god. And I've always said, कोई इसको बुरा कह के तो दिखाए, I mean, like, try and make that into abusive word, but I'm wrong, okay? Because I've always said, okay, imagine somebody giving that as a gali, tera chandan mahal, like, how is that you can't really. However, I discovered more recently, because I started studying Sanskrit, Do you know what is the Sanskrit word or one of the Sanskrit words for mango?
No,
Chut.
I don't. Oh my God. Are you kidding?
So I guess
Wow.
because the vulva, the vagina, that entire
Yeah,
area, the
see.
outer labia, looks a little bit like a mango ki gutli or whatever. Maybe
Right.
that's what it was referred to, and today it's become this. So like one of the festivals I was talking about is called Chut Latika, and
Oh,
I can't say it. So I have now
yeah.
found that there's one other text, Raghavan translates it as Navlatika. So I call it Navlatika. In this, where they have this little game of tag, where you take, it's again in the month of Chaitra, where you take little
Yeah.
twigs with mango blossoms. And basically, women or girls would have this game of tag, where you chase each other. And if I tap you, you have to tell me who you have a crush on, So it was one of those. But yeah, I can't call it Chutlatika. Sorry. Mujhse nahi
Yeah.
hoga.
Oh my God. That's really something. Another one's a lot of details in your books where you describe, like you spoke about the jewelry. There's a lot of imagery of how perfumes, food, and jewelry and all have a lot of connection to sexual pleasure. Tell us some interesting anecdotes or some such excerpts from your book.
So yeah, the perfume, the idea was that, so they basically say that sex should be totally joyous.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's no point having sex. It should be totally joyous. Then they say that a woman's pleasure is the most important one, because if the woman is fully pleasured, then she will want that experience to carry on. Otherwise, she'll lose interest and you will lose out. So it's quite an interesting idea. 2000 years ago, they actually understood this.
Absolutely.
So everything is basically based on understanding that a woman, so it also says that a man's pleasure is like fire. It starts down below and it goes upwards, and like fire, very very easy to ignite, very easy to put out. The woman's pleasure is like water. It starts here, it flows downwards, but like water, it takes very long to come to the boil, but once it's there, it takes very long to cool down. Okay. So the idea with each thing was to arouse you, but also to add variety, to make women understand that, or to make men understand that there was so much more to a woman's pleasure than just the act of sex. Because again, we have to remember that the Kama Sutra was written for men. 300 and something AD, women were not taught how to read or write. This book was written to teach men how to behave in social circumstances. And so this was written to teach men how to pleasure a woman properly. So, perfume was that each part of your body had to be fragranced with a different perfume. So, over here, it was mitti ka itar or something else like that, something earthy. And then here was supposed to be very innocent smell, like jasmine, so that it was like, daro mat, aage aao, I won't bite,
Oh,
like. Then you got to the belly button. That was supposed to be a very sort of strong perfume because that's a tiny area. And so it's my favorite two bits are the curve of the waist had to be very, very subtle, because the idea was that your lover had to press their face into your waist to smell that, because it says that this is a road that every lover must travel. So the perfume makes sure that it doesn't end too soon. The journey doesn't end too soon. And the back, which is very, very sensitive, had to be dotted only. So you created a trail. You didn't rub it over. You sort of basically put little dots of sandalwood. And incidentally, sandalwood is only to be used in the summer, because when it starts to get to the rainy season, it loses its fragrance. So yeah, you created a trail, because they said that, if you're going to enjoy lovemaking or intimacy all of your life, it has to be treated like an art form. You have to think of pleasure as an art form. It's not just something, you put off the lights, you take off your makeup, you jump into bed. The idea is to make it special. And so all of this, so they say that at the end of perfuming yourself, you had to be like a banquet of tastes and textures and smells. Because, it literally is, I think it was about making, also, if you imagine this whole process of perfuming yourself, if your maid was perfuming you, Just the contact of somebody's hand against your flesh, it is anyway amazing for you. It's very arousing anyway.
It is.
So it was supposed to basically make you understand that your pleasure is got many, many dimensions. And each dimension is really important for you. But, you know, one of the stories that I always like to tell, we were discussing this with one of my Tantra teachers. He's a very young person, but amazing. And he follows the Kashmiri, the Kaula Tantra tradition, as opposed to the Vaishnav Tantra traditions. And we were discussing how in Tantra, now most people will know that there's a lot of sexual yoga involved. So, you know, there are certain sexual acts involved, but mostly what happens is that the woman is seen as the path to heaven. So the path of pleasure to heaven goes through the woman. So the man is supposed to perform different pujas on her, whether it's the yoni puja, whatever he's going to do. In the lovemaking, in the sexual yoga, it is the man who does the stuff and the woman takes it and channels that path to moksha. Now, we couldn't find any of the tantras where it is the other way around, where the woman gets to do this for herself. So she's the subject, the man becomes the object, and she channels that pleasure through him so that she finds her pleasure.
Yeah.
Again, same thing. I guess it didn't benefit the people who were translating the text, so those got left. They're there. I'm not saying they're not there, but very few and difficult to get to. But the stories got translated. And again, the stories got lost. So I have a great one, which I'm going to tell the ladies over here and tell you, Shruti, where there is this man and he comes to see this courtesan regularly. And one day when he comes to her, she smells on him the perfume of another woman.
Oh.
And she starts to get fascinated by this other woman. Because as I said, if every part of your body is perfumed with a different fragrance, when you make love, depending on what you're doing, it depends on which perfume of yours you have left on what part of the man. Yeah?
Absolutely.
So she starts to get fascinated and she starts to think about this more and more. And eventually she gets so fascinated by the other woman that she starts to leave little messages on the man's body for the other woman. Because in ancient times, we had a whole erotic vocabulary around love bites and love scratches. So each bite, each scratch had its own shape, its own message, its own season, its own occasion. So she leaves messages for the other woman on his body, and eventually the other woman picks it up and she starts to respond. And the two of them have this incredibly intense affair. They never meet, but they explore each other's bodies through his body.
Wow.
And so they reach that point of pleasure through his body. And I absolutely love it. Just imagine the power of that story.
Absolutely.
And that we told these stories.
Yeah, and this is absolutely fabulous. I really think that all the women in the world will be so much happier if these books were introduced as textbooks back to the men again, and they learn how to pleasure a woman, right? You'll have a whole 50% of the world will be so thankful to you. This is absolutely intriguing, and there's so much more. There's so many more layers I think we can go into and look into, Seemaji. This is a topic that I think I can talk to you about endlessly, but as I'm keeping a look on the clock, I see that it's time to now open out to our attendees and see if any of them have any questions for you.
Anshuji, can you switch on the video?
So thank you, Seemaji, for the absolutely delightful session. And let me warn you, there are men as well in this audience. It's not just the women. And I have a host of questions, so I'll take them up for you. First question is from Deepa Mishra. Good evening, Seemaji. Thank you for such a lovely session. It is quite an eye-opener. And my question is, why, despite being a highly sophisticated book, Kama Sutra has not got the attention it deserves in India? Most of the time, it is taken as a matter of embarrassment or shame rather than pride, whereas for the rest of the world, it is a source of amazement.
Yeah, unfortunately, sorry, did Anshu freeze? Okay. Should I go ahead and answer the question? Because I know Anshu's thing has got frozen.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So what's happened is what's very sad, I think, is that like a lot of other texts from India, we have actually lost a lot of our ancient texts. And in the actual translating of them, which has come much, much later, if you imagine that a lot of our texts have been lost, they have then been translated by the British. The Kama Sutra was actually translated in the 1800s by an Englishman. They understood, I mean, he didn't even know Sanskrit himself. He got a couple of other Pandits to translate it for him. But they chose to translate it word for word rather than understanding the metaphors. And the only word that probably made sense to them was, like I said, I mean, if they read about the altar, they wouldn't know. If they read about the jingling girdle, they wouldn't know what it was. But the only word that probably made sense to them was position. So they said, positions ke bare hoga, positions ke bare baat ki hai. Let's talk about positions. So unfortunately, we have lost a lot of our literature. It's been lost in over the mists of time. Then it's been destroyed in translation. And the thing is, it's now up to us as Indians to bring it back. It is up to us rather than saying each time, ye galat hai, ye nahi hona chahiye. You know, it's about time that we brought it back.
So thank you for that one. And I'm taking the next question, which is from Manjulika. I love your Instagram page, especially your reels. Who and what gave you the idea of discussion through reels?
Oh, okay. So that is my daughter who has, over this last 1 year lockdown period, she finished university during lockdown. You know, that whole idea of that full life stopped. She was locked away at home. She had nothing else to do. And she said, Mom, let me help you. And she's very, very interested in social media. So she does this for a few people. And she decided that this is how we have to do the reels. So it's all her doing. I'm afraid I know nothing about reels.
Brilliant.
And she tells me she's the one who actually so apparently, ladies, if you're interested, because I didn't know this, there are certain reels that trend, and the idea is to go out and see what is trending and then do something based on what is trending to be able to put that particular point across. Because I've been doing this work for many years, and suddenly you put it in the right kind of reel and it just reaches so many more people. So yeah, it's the magic.
So should I take the next question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anjana Anand asks, there is so much finesse and beauty and meaning. Where did we lose it? At what point did sex become such a taboo?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I guess it must have happened with evolution, with the growth of patriarchy, with the idea of control. You have to remember that India has been through so many different occupiers, and everybody has brought their own idea to the table. Somewhere along the way, I guess, and you know, the thing is, Anshu and Anjana, who's asked the question, that there are a lot of texts out there. They were written all the way till the end of the 1800s. There has been literature inspired by the Kama Sutra. But unfortunately, a lot of it is not known because it's like a parallel strand of literature. It's the Prakrit literature. If you ever want to go out and look for something, it's known as the Prakrit literature. And the last nail in this coffin, I guess, came from the British. One of my favorite books, which I was going to suggest that everybody should try and see if you can read. It's called Radhika Santavanam, or The Appeasement of Radhika. And it was written in around the 1700s, I think, by a courtesan called Muddapalini in possibly in Hyderabad. Then it goes underground, and it's a very erotic book. So it's basically about how Radha gets her niece Ila ready for marriage to Lord Krishna. But once she marries him off to her, and how Krishna then becomes totally involved with Ila and forgets about Radha, how upset she gets, and then this whole idea of him coming back to her. But Muddapalini, they say, made it quite autobiographical, and she based it on her own.
Oh shit! Hold on. I dropped my. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good.
Yes. Please
I
carry on.
dropped my this thing. Yeah. So basically, it's she talks about, and she literally, it's a no holds barred book. She talks about how they are in the bedroom in the most beautiful language that you can imagine, but she talks about it all. And come the 1800s, into the 1800s, that book was pushed aside. Finally, it gets translated by an Englishman, where all of these passages are taken out. Somebody else, her name was Nagarathanamma. She says, again, she's a courtesan, and she says, excuse me, why have you sanitized this book? We need to put it out the way it is. It's a beautiful piece of writing. And she stopped from putting it out because it's like, no, this comes under the Obscenity Act. The British also put down something called the Obscenity Act in our penal code, which is section 292. And it says that we will convict you under this for writing such an obscene book. And no, you can't. And the Indian men also get after her. They stop her from writing it. And she says, why is it that if a man was to write that book, you'd be okay with it, but because a woman is saying it, you're not okay with it? And they tell her, I mean, she's labeled a prostitute, that it's just awful what they do to her. And she continues this fight, and she makes sure that it gets published. But this is the sort of thing that we have actually had to face. So you can understand why it's kind of gone underground.
So the next question is from Nishchint. How come India, the land where Vatsyana wrote Kama Sutra, where polyandry and polygamy were commonplace, where promiscuity, for the lack of a better word, was an art form, becomes so prudish a society? What has gone wrong along the way? Why is sexuality, erotica, a taboo instead of a celebrated and practiced as an art form?
Well, I think so. My last question probably answers that, but I'll tell you what I would like to say is that, ladies and gentlemen, it's now in your hands. You're the next people to take it forward. And if you want this world to change for your children, I think that you're going to have to start that change.
Next question is from Gunjan. Was faith primal in having a sexual experience? How was orgy taken in this reference?
So again, I don't know how much I would, it's not that there were not, okay, it's not that there isn't literature about multiple sexual partners, but I should also tell you that generally it is always about the king who is depicted with the multiple sexual partners. So it's always the king with multiple women, and it's all part of his virility. It's all part of, it was part of his identity. Somebody made this, one of the Indian scholars actually wrote this great article. I can't remember what it's called, but they said that, in the West, when a king wanted to display their strength, they would have themselves painted with a lot of armor or, lands that they had conquered. In India, when a king wanted to show his strength and his power, he would have himself painted in a sexual interaction with several women, because that was their virility, that was their strength, their power. Now, I don't have very many, the Kama Sutra doesn't refer to a lot of other orgies as a regular thing, because like I said, it actually deals with the beautification of sex. To be perfectly honest, maybe it's totally unreal, but it doesn't actually talk about any of the nastinesses. It even says that no kind of violence, no kind of aggression is allowed. So, it's very sort of, it's a treatise, basically. So it gives you the rules of how it should be and what it shouldn't be. The Kama Sutra was written, like I said, for men, but also men of higher society. So all of these things, when we talk about men of the upper classes or kings, it was a natural, done thing for them that they would have multiple partners. It doesn't say anything about the lower classes at all. And there are texts written, I mean, who was telling me about this one particular text, which is called the Stri Shudra, is it called the Stri Shudra Puran or the Stri Shudra Tantra? I can't remember. It's one of those. But again, the Shudra women would not have had a chance to read it. They wouldn't have been educated enough to know it. So it would have been written by the upper classes and would have been read by them. So I don't have very much to add on this thing of orgies, I'm afraid.
So the last question is by Jyoti Bhalla. Do you think clothes make a woman sensuous? If yes, why?
I think that we feel sensuous with certain things, don't we? I mean, I know that if I am in my tracksuit bottom, which I generally have been for this last year, I don't feel very sensuous, in my just my sweaty t-shirt. The moment I put on a sari blouse, I suddenly start to feel different about it. Whether you're saying that if what you wear makes you sexy, I don't think that wearing, plunging neckline, you know what I mean? Like wearing clothes that are out of the way revealing or whatever. I guess it depends on how it makes you feel. What I was going to tell you was that in the Kam Shastras, the idea of what makes you sexy, it says exercise makes you very sexy. And it also talks about your alankar, your makeup, your, like all the shringhar that made you sexy. A lot of it was about tousled hair after lovemaking. And, there was so that's the sort of thing that they talk about that makes you beautiful or makes you sexy. And I think, like I said earlier, it's what comes from inside your brain. So if a particular kind of outfit makes you feel good, then that's what you should go for. Because you know what? Your sexuality is the core of your being. It's right here on the inside of you. And it's got to come from within you. It's got to be about how you feel, not what somebody else is telling you. And the first thing is, like I said, our pleasure starts here in the head. If you feel it here, you will feel it everywhere. If you don't feel it over there, you're not going to feel it anywhere. You can be as beautifully dressed as you want. Nothing will actually happen.
So well said.
So, I guess we've come to an end. Though we want this to go on and on, it's been so engaging and so intriguing. On behalf of the Foundation and Ehsaas Women of Meerut and Faridabad, I would like to thank Seema Anandji and Shruti Mittalji for an enriching and enthralling conversation. I would also like to thank our presenter, Shree Cement Limited, our associate, Dainik Jagran, Hotel Crystal Palace, Humane Foundation. Last but not the least, I would also like to thank our audience, whose never-ending support has made these sessions possible. Thank you so much. Have a pleasant evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Seema ji. It was an absolute pleasure, and I could go on for hours.
Thank you, Seema ji. Thank you.
Shweta, thank you. Thank you, all of you. Thank you for being there to listen to me.
Bye.